Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And we want to welcome Alex for his beautiful teaching, his beautiful sharing, and explaining to us things we may not have considered, or we considered and perhaps didn't understand it in a certain way, but he's opening up many different dimensions for us, and we do welcome you, Alex. Please come in and share as you'd like.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you all for attending today. This is the North American team meeting, and I really appreciate it. As you know, the strength of this meeting crosses the oceans and brings in all the continents. That's what makes this meeting so strong. So I really want to thank all the knowledge seekers who are attending today and making this such a powerful event. I'm trying to convey the knowledge of Marin Tevakoli-Kesh and the modern plasma science, because we're all messengers of peace, friendship, and health. And as we say, it's for all nations of the world. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are on the advanced outer space level. Today, I'd like to talk about Violacion. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is May 21st, 2023. This is the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So we are now completing the outer space series, and this is the advanced portion. And so I hope you enjoy the journey. You don't have to fasten your seatbelts. Just have to be comfortable and to come to grips with the fact that these violations play an important part in our lives. And so we've gone from teaching, understanding, knowing insights, earth space, inner space, and now we're trying to get into outer space. And we'll see how these violations are holding us back from these advancements, because we're still a dilemma man. And we come to the understanding that there's no such thing as an immoral soul, but there is an immoral man. And so this immoral man is actually a disconnected soul. And so we find that with the PM-TIC Mattergen condition, there's a lack of communication. There's a barrier, and we can't jump it because the soul is disconnected. But what we have to remember is that this is an individual decision. So that condition can be isolated, and that condition can be changed. So we have to be gracious enough to allow that to happen. And yet at the same time, there has to be a motivation to bring it to bear. And so how do we do that? So this is part of our search for outer space because it's a critical point. The desperate search for outer space is due to these violations. And the violation is of our little tiny pie in the sky. In fact, it's so tiny, it's a little red dot in the bottom right-hand corner. And you see the rest of the universe and the relationship. And how do we get from here to there? And so one of those ways is with the light. And we can create light in many different ways. And when we speak of light, we can speak of it in many different ways. And so the structure of light, as outlined in book number 2, explains this. And what we're trying to do is explain this energy and understand its limitations and how we can transcend its limitations. So the most important thing, of course, is we don't want any of these problems in our backyard. So we call it the NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard, because you see, we just always dream of these simply irresistible bigger pies. And the problem with that, of course, it's just still a piece of the whole pie. It doesn't matter how big it is, we only want this piece. But what happens if we find that piece to be violated? Well, let's just see if we can get another pie. But what happens if we find that this pie, which happens to be our Earth space, is completely violated? Which pie did you want? And if you find that no pie is acceptable, then if we're looking at our Earth space as an Earth ship, is the time for a new alternative? Is the alternative to abandon ship? And the answer is no. Contrary to popular violations. Because you see, there are many of humanity's domains. And so obviously the most important domain for each and every one of us is our man space, right? That's very personal. But the existence of man space here really depends on Earth space. And so as long as my backyard is okay, my Earth space is okay, is that how that works? But really and truly, if the governing agency and the enforcement agency is violated and infiltrated, then that domain of man space and Earth space extends to inner space. And we share this inner space. Man space shares the inner space with Earth space. And yet we want to go into outer space. How can we go into outer space when we don't take care of our place? This is the dilemma, man. And so I don't want to list all the violations, just to give you a general understanding. So our man space can be violated with bullets and hand grenades. And so we find that Earth space can be violated with mining and tunneling. But the inner space is kind of different. It can be violated with terrorism and mind control. So how do we violate outer space? It's by extending these delinquencies to include murder and suicide, both of which are violations of universal law. And so although man-made law maybe is having trouble with the violations of our inner space, we can't violate the universal law if we intend to go into outer space. That's a fact. And so wherever there's a violation, of course, there's a violator. Who is this violator? So we like to pass the buck, don't we? We like to blame someone else. Say, well, there's a perpetrator, or there's an instigator, or an agitator, or a provocateur, or flat out murderer. And so there's a wronging, if you will. There's a violation of some place, some person, some family, some country. And we can measure this violation however we want. And so we're not going to list all the violations, and we're not going to list all the violators. The point is that there is a creation of another violator, and that's the revenge seeker. So, which is to say, if I were a soldier and I were to kill an enemy, the son of that soldier that was killed would seek revenge. And the problem, of course, is that I would be the target. And then the problem with that, of course, is that my son would likewise want to seek revenge. And so he can't seek revenge on your father, so he has to seek revenge on the son. And so it continues. And this becomes a physical condition, but is dependent on an emotional feedback. And so we say, well, emotional feedback is non-tangible. It's non-tangible, but it sure is forceful. It's forceful enough to create revenge seekers of all kinds. And so is the aggrieved son the only revenge seeker? Or do you see where it's possible for a revenge seeker to be just someone who is violated, maybe not in such a dramatic fashion? Oh, you stepped on my toe, I will kick you. There, that's a revenge seeker. So we have to look at what is the purpose of the revenge seeker, because basically someone was wronged. And so the revenge seeker wants to seek revenge to right the wrong. And so we say, okay, well, two wrongs make a right. Well, is that true? Or do two wrongs make two wrongs? And so the revenge continues. But the effect really, and the connection really, is through this family of emotions. So each of us has this emotion of man, and this emotion of physicality, and this emotion of presence. And with respect to man space's point of view, it determines our emotion of position, and from there our emotion of vision. And so really these are all feedback points of view. And when we look at the emotion of knowledge, we find that that's a soul space point of view, which means that emotion of knowledge is carried and comes to you prior to having any revenge emotion, because it comes prior to any violation. Unless you consider being born a violation, some parents think your birth is a violation. But the thing is that your birth is a fulfillment of your obligation, your deal, the organization that you made in advance, embedded in the emotion of knowledge, manifesting yourself in physicality. And so we mistake this for the emotion of love. And maybe the glint in daddy's eye was the emotion of love. Or maybe the glint in daddy's eye was the emotion of violation. Is it possible that the glint in mommy's eye was an emotion of violation also? Women tend to get a pass on this. The harshness always falls on the man. But the statistics say otherwise. The statistics say that 55% of the women create the violation and 45% the men. So we have to define manifestation. We see that all plasma feeding leads to this manifestation. And this manifestation is dependent on two fields coming together. When two fields come together, they form another. And any formation of any field is a manifestation. And so in that process, that manifestation may be non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible. So therefore, there's a plasmatic reality and a physical reality. And as we try and navigate between the here and the there, wherever we are, that's it. That's where we are. And so that is a manifestation of the emotion of presence, because that's a form artifact of energy and motion at that manifestation point. And so there you are. And so when someone gives you that glorious 35 seconds of attention and say, tell me what plasma science is all about. And you say, well, how can I convey over 6,000 hours of teaching in our archives and just simply say, you know what, there's plasma is a kind of energy state, and there are many different kinds of energy state. It all depends on your point of view. And when you do understand this, it helps you in understanding our earth space. And when you understand that, that leads you to how you find your inner space. And it's from there that you can begin searching for outer space. Because this is important. It's the most important thing, because it's part of the creation of the universe. And let's face it, you are part of the universe. So it'd be nice to know how the universe is created. And so we see in the book number 1, the universal order of creation of matters is that all the universe exists from energy. And because energy is always in motion, it's always positive. So the direction of the motion is where the charge is. So energy is a charge in motion. And if it's in motion, it has to go from somewhere and to somewhere. And so therefore things have to work in combination. How do you decide what things to consider? What combination? And if you understand that there's different energy levels, so we find that there can be an interaction between different energy states. And so this interaction comes across with energy feeding packs, what we call PM ticks. And within these PM ticks is the emotion of knowledge. And each of us has our own flavor of knowledge. And as we discovered last week, this knowledge is conveyed by the simply irresistible energy of love. The PM ticks are magnetical. In order to maintain a stability, they have to have a gravitational core. And they can travel and transcend different energy states. And as such, they can transcend different locations. And they can transcend different locations with different energy states. Each of these energy states is a reality dimension. And so these PM ticks can transcend many reality dimensions. And we'd like to transcend many reality dimensions. We'd like to work as a charge. Now we have to realize that as a charge, there's a magnetical aspect, which is part of the emission pole, and there's a gravitational aspect, which is part of what you absorb. And so this affects the speed of rotation because the rotation gives you your gravitational stability. And so the faster the speed and the higher the strength dictates the direction and position. And so we resolved a very important anomaly because we found there was a two-way street, but we can't see the connection because we can't see how we got from here to there. All what we can see is where we are and where we're going. But the connection is non-visible, and it's well organized, and it's very strong, and it's there. So whether you can explain it or whether you can understand it or not is irrelevant. It's there. This bond between the plasmatic spectrum and the physicality spectrum is there. That is the reality dimension. And each of us has this bond dimension. So each of us has a flavor. And that flavor is our radiance. So for the purposes of discussion, we'll just call it a vanilla radiance, a vanilla flavor. And we can all add our favorite flavors to it. And we should, because that's why we came. That's what we want to achieve. But what is the size of the scheme that you're pursuing? Is it a small scheme or is it a large scheme? You just want that little piece of tiny pie? Maybe you just want a crumb. That would be handy. Get a lot of crumbs from one piece of pie. But what happens when your pie is polluted? So what do? You go to another pie. And so we see that the origin of the universe is such. We see that we can travel with our soul, and we can travel to many places. And there's a connection. There's a plasma connection with the carbon. And in the plasma state, we call carbogen. And this is all part of the nuclear creation. But the fact of the matter is that the plasma science is now superseding the nuclear science. And that's perfectly normal, because that's what constitutes advancement, as this is the Advanced Outer Space Series. If you're advanced, you go ahead. And so every star formation that we create is an inertia field. And as such, that becomes the combination, convergence, and divergence. And each combination has a soul. And the coming and going of these formations is also an inertia field. And so this is how our small dreams and our small pies become bigger pies, because we dream of bigger pies. And so the soul of inertia manifests through the conversion of these force fields coming from the star formations and creating this force field of inertia. And that's how we grow. And that's how we can travel. And so we're looking forward to the Plasmagen Travel Agency. And the thing is that we already know how to do a lot of things. We were born to Earth. But, you know, we say, well, we don't know how, and we don't care to know how we were born to Earth. But clearly we were born for a reason. But we say we do not know why, or do not care to know why we were born. And some want to travel to Mars, but we don't know how, and we don't know why, and we don't care to know. But the fact is, we weren't born to Mars. We were born to Earth. And so why are we having trouble understanding this? And so we find that there's a lot of, shall we say, groups that are trying to, you know, shall we say, prevent this from being brought forward. And I say, well, why do you want to do that? And you say, well, if you can't explain it, then the answer could be that they're ignorant. And so we like to call them names. But we have to understand that you can't insult the ignorant. That's what constitutes ignorance. Ignorant people are ignorant. So you can't violate their sensibilities. So we have to really assess our two forces, how they're coming together. We have to see our planet as if it's our goal, and we have to choose our planet as if it's our goal. And it's part of our dream. But it's not just a dream. It's an inertia manifestation that is irrelevant of time and distance. It's the coming together of the three dimensions, the X, Y, and Z axis, into the manifestation of a reality. And that reality can be a plasmatic reality or a physical reality. Except that we have to understand that the plasmatic reality always precedes the physical reality. So now we know that we could have a plasmatic reality without manifesting the physical reality. And we seem to do that very well at the point of death. But now we know that we could travel the plasma highway. So first of all, humans can transport on Earth space. And humans may transmute in outer space. And we've always felt that the connection is the emotion of love, but the connection is not an element. The connection is an energy pack. And so love is not an emotion. Love is energy in motion. And as we said, it's simply irresistible. And so this is the plasma feeding rule, where the higher strength field feeds the lower strength field. but it's a two-way street. So we can increase the field forces, that would be natural creation, and we can decrease the field forces, and that would be natural decay. Or we can have a totally stable field forces, we call that catalytic stability. And the prime example of that is the sun. Comes up every day, gives us energy, goes away at night, but it's giving us energy on the other side of the world, isn't it? So it just doesn't stop. We just think it stops. And so this stopping and starting seems to be part of our natural existence. Well, we have to understand that it never stops. So it's just a matter of a point of view. And so there are sequences, and all of these sequences affect the plasma field forces of repulsion and attraction, which we call magnetical and gravitational force fields. They imply the feeding and feedback of energy. And as such, these choices become personal. And so you, as someone who makes personal choices, have to make that choice as if you were the last man standing. It's not something you can delegate. It's something that you can turn on and turn off, increase or decrease, enhance or diminish. And this affects what you're feeding, how you're feeding, the strength of the feeding, and your positioning. But there's always a risk. There's always a risk. You're going to create something, and that creation could be mayhem. But when we created the cups of life, the first thing we did is we said that they're cups of life. So they were not cups of pandemic or cups of having fun. These were cups of life, very essential. It was representative of that core space in our inner space, that emotional strength that we need to exist. And as such, one cup was an emotional cup and one cup was a physical cup, because the zinc represents the emotional connection and the copper represents the physical connection, and we made a GANS of each, plus a CO2 GANS, a calcium GANS, an amino acid GANS, and a H2O GANS. And these are all radiance manifestations of the intentions. And how do you see the intentions? Beyond the fact that there was a physical placement. Where did this GANS come from? And so you see that there are relationships. And so it's this relationship which allows the manifestation of that inertia field. And so each cup, where we had an emotion cup, a physical cup, and a soul cup, come together to create that radiance cup of our soul radiance. But that would only be in a plasmatic state until we have a reference. And the reference for us is our earth space. So the man space and the earth space has to come in combination, creating that inertia space. And we took the opportunity to manifest that into the physical space. And that is a feature of humanity. And so the seeing is the believing. Now we can see things, that we can see things that we look through. We can see things that we've created. And then we can see things that we've created that we can't see. And we say, well, it hasn't vanished, it's just transparent. And how does this affect us? And it affects us emotionally. So is it an emotional feeding, or is it an emotional feedback? Or is it a feeding of the feedback? Well, this is what we know. We know that we can go to sleep at night and have a dream. And sometimes we remember and sometimes we don't. But the thing is, we wake up where we left off. So what happened in between? So we know that there is a method of transmutation plasmatically, in addition to the fact that we know that we were born and that it had to be a transmutation plasmatically. Well, this is very good. And we do know that the energy has to be binding in order for us to create a field, because the inertia field is the binding of two forces coming together. But we have a capability of making feeding inertia choices. And most of us choose to do this at the expense of others. And this really doesn't make sense because, first of all, the source of that energy is the weakest of all the energy options that we have to draw from. And second of all, we have to violate the person that we're taking that energy from. And that person could be responsible only for his man space, or that person could be responsible in addition to the man space to be responsible for the earth space. That person could be responsible for the extension of his personal man space, which would include his family. And so anytime we're taking at the expense of others, we're not always sure of how much we're taking and how we're taking it. But what we do know is that the most effective way to take it is through deceit, lying and cheating, double cross. And the most effective of all, of course, is murder. And all of that is at the expense of others. However, it's also at the personal expense. You see, because that's what creates the emotion of vision. That emotion of vision comes from what we see, what we hear, what we smell, and what we say. And all of this is an inertia feedback from our environment. And so we are part of that environment. You cannot extricate yourself from that environment. You were born here. You were born on Earth. You're here. You can't not be here and be here at the same time. So we create what we are. But did we create what we are as babies? And is what we created as babies the same thing we're creating as adults? And so we have to understand that this path on the plasma highway doesn't just end with our arrival on Earth space, but it begins in outer space, comes and connects with our environment, and manifests either into a plasmatic reality or a physical reality. And if there's any message that we wanted to convey with respect to these teachings that I've been doing here, is to understand the difference between the plasmatic reality and the physical reality, because that determines your point of view. That determines your source of inspiration. and that determines your destination. So this manifestation of the inertia is always of a certain kind. We're not specifying what kind. It's the PM ticks are a magnetical feeding. And in order to feed, they have to feed to a field. That field is created through the convergence of these energies of principal matter, transition matter, and convergence matter. And they come together and they convert into a plasma jet matter, which is now a MAGRAV condition, which is very stable. But that stable condition is not visible. That is the connecting stable field between our presence and our environment. And that creates a field interaction, which we call inertia. And that's where we are. But that field is representative of plasma reality, physical reality, and the connection to both, which is that emotional reality. And so all of this emotion creates motion. And so we find through the natural decay of the neutron that we create these PM ticks. But because we can create, and it's a two-way street, we can also decay, but the decay is another form of creation, and that's a two-way street. And so the PM ticks are released in both directions of creation and decay. And so there's this bounding factor, and we are part of that. And our decision to be part of the creation or to be part of the decay is part of our manifestation. But we, as soul travelers, are not part of that. We are the bonding fudge factor. We're the ones who determine whether or not the rain is good or bad. We're the ones who determine if the violation is good or bad. We're the ones who judge. Guilty or not guilty. So we're the ones who are the product of this relationship. And so when we try and balance this out and say, well, 1 and 1 is greater than 2 because it involves synergy. That's how life works. There's always a benefit. But, you know, we have a scientific responsibility. We also have a spiritual responsibility. And so each one is one part of the equation. But is each one the same one? It's just one, but it has a different flavor and has a different responsibility. So we need to add the two together to be able to develop the synergy, transcend the limitations. This is where the plasma science adds to the knowledge. Great, so we transcended the limitations and we move towards change. But what rate of change? And so what's been limiting us has been the nuclear science because of the limitations of the speed of light. But when we look at the universal community, we see that they can transcend the physical speed of light. And we have that capability as well. So this is not so strange. We have a radiance creation, but that radiance creation comes from an ethos, and that ethos is shared with the universe. It involves morality, compassion, and courage. And so if that ethos is shared with the universe, how come we're not shared with the universe? What's our problem? There's a missing link, isn't it? And so that limitation on us, which has been bestowed, we call it the speed of light, We didn't say which light. We didn't say if it was a physical light or a plasmatic light. Because the fact of the matter is, our existence travels at the speed of light. And so we see in a simple relationship that we're looking at this outer space and inner space relationship. And so everything in the plasma science is based on relationships and on fields. Well, a photon, is that a field? Yes, it is. Because it's a containment. And it contains the emotion of knowledge. And so that becomes a field. And that field can go from one field to another field. And so the way we see it is it's either a particle or a wave. And so that determines on your point of view and whether or not you're working from the physical reality or plasmatic reality. And if you're working from the physical reality, chances are you're going down a one-way street. And that really becomes a problem when that street's a dead end. And so we create these barriers, which we said. So if love is an energy, what is hate? Well, hate's just a mirage. It's non-existent. It can't exist because energy is always in motion. Energy is always positive. And so you cannot give hate. It's just like you cannot give cold. You could only give energy or not give energy. And so we substitute money for this energy. And that money creates a real barrier to us elevating to the highest energy level. And that barrier is so strong, it becomes an addiction. And as such, it manufactures its own mythical fields. And we summarize that as hate. And that manifests itself into many kinds of and types of violation. And from there, it manifests itself into many types of revenge. And so that can be a revenge country to country, person to person, or self-inflicted. So our soul positioning comes from this plasmatic symbiosis where we had this positioning that brought us here, but we're at the crossroads between this plasmatic reality and this physical reality if we cannot determine which is the one that is dominant. Because the inertia field is the interaction of the plasmatic reality with the physical reality. And so our physical reality, according to the nuclear science, is restricted to the area or the time frame between when we were born to the time when we die. And so all the rules follow therefrom, except to understand that those rules are man-made rules. And they bear actually very little resemblance to universal rules. Because really, when it comes down to it, do we need to write these rules when we have sensibilities? And so if we're violating these rules, we're certainly violating our sensibilities. So we have to understand that there's a different matter plasma dimension. One is gravitational, which is very physical, and one is magnetical, which is very plasmatic. You can't touch it, you can't see it. That's what it is. It's non-visible, non-tangible. And so both of these dimensions can be a feeding dimension. And as such, both of these dimensions can also be a feedback dimension. But when we're looking at the relationship between these two dimensions, we have to understand that the plasmatic dimension is the feeding dimension, and the physical dimension is the feedback dimension. And the reason for it is very simple. And because we have to make choices, either to increase or decrease the energy flow so that we can maintain a stability. And as a result, man has become feedback dominant. And this is important if you want to maintain stability. But it's become feedback dominant through violation. And so that affects the relationship because, again, it's your field strength versus another field strength. So we have this inertia of relations, and they follow the plasmatic rules, regardless of energy state. Energy states increase or decrease by at least an order of magnitude, which is 10 times. And how many 10 times 10 times 10s is it? And the speed of the rotation of the field affects the field strength. And so the higher energy state feeds the lower energy state. But as we said, it's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And so as a result of that two-way street, then these field relations have to be accommodated for to determine the positioning. And you don't determine your positioning exclusively by your neighbors. You can transcend multiple energy states. So the fact of the matter is that Earth space is a kind of energy state, and it's gravitationally stable. And inner space is also gravitationally stable. But this inner space exists in Earth space. This inner space exists in man space. And so the combination, inertia, Earth space and man space, has its own field. And that field has an inner space. And we now have the technology to make that gravitationally stable, because this plasma reality is bound to the ethos of the universe. And so is that because of what we've done? No, look at the periodic table of elements, and you'll see the Earth space did this without our involvement. The problem with the periodic table of elements is that they're elementary. Life is much more complex. And so we have to understand that, you know, if you're looking at the details, which is the sum of the parts, you have to understand the details of knowing. It's the sum of the parts that's greater. And so when we look at these individual Earth space details and we see, well, there's carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, which forms the amino acids. The sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium creates the environment, and the iron, copper, zinc, and silicon is the physicality. And so we can transcend all of these various energy states. And so if we're trying to understand ourselves, we have to understand the soul of the earth and its relations. And so there's a physicality of the body of the earth space, but there's a soul of the body. This is the inner space soul of the earth body. So the outer space soul of the earth involves, well, the soul of the earth, the soul of us, man, and the soul of the sun. This is all part of our outer space. But not only, because man wants to travel into outer space. So we find that one of the ways we started to transcend was to create a monatomic structure, which we call a nanosphere state. And we understand the key difference between the animate and inanimate has to do with the limitation. So when you have more than 3 in a chain, well, that's a part polymer. And so we don't go more than 3 in a chain. We build. And we build layers, we build more fields, and we bring more things into combination. And as a result, not only is the plasma science creating a superconductor at room temperature, but you can rest assured that we are a superconductor at room temperature as well, because you know what? We're at room temperature. And so the basis of our structure is this amino star, which involves carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. But let's face it, carbon's pretty solid, and the others are gases. And so how do we look at our blood and we see that it has iron, and iron is pretty solid as well. And so how do we get this iron to flow? So when we see that the iron comes in combination with the oxygen in an iron tetrahedron, that becomes the basis of our blood, which is the energy transfer system that allows us to connect from that plasmatic air, which involves the gases. But now we have to ask, are these plasmatic gases or physical gases? Because we've already said that the carbon is physical. So how does it get to be a gas? Well, then it has to become a carbogen. And so the others are also have a duality. They can be in a plasmatic state or a physical state. So we look at the carbogen in order to transcend from the physical to the plasmatic. It has to enlist the services of the oxygen. And so we see the carbon with a tetrahedron of 4 oxygens. It's another star formation. So there's a binary bond, a double bond that allows this gravitational stability of these various gases to remain. And so we see that manifested in terms of oxygen. It always comes in pairs. And as such, when we look at the ratio of the mass of the oxygen versus the mass of the hydrogen, that doesn't seem very balanced. So therefore, we have assumed a very elementary formula, H2O, 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. That would not be very stable. So in order to be stable with the domination of the mass of the oxygen, that double bond remains. And so the gravitational stability of the oxygen molecules transcend to the gravitational stability of the water molecules. And the water molecules are capable of interacting with everything else. It's nature's solvent. If we remove the oxygen and replace it with the hydrogen, it still becomes gravitationally stable, because we find that the gases have to work in combination to maintain this gravitational stability. And so the relationship between the mass of the carbon and the mass of the hydrogen is also extreme. But we could say simplistically that it's a ratio, whereas the oxygen to hydrogen is an 8-to-1 ratio. So it's still a wide range, but not as wide. And so when we look at the amino star in its plasmatic state, then we have to recognize that every point, whether it's carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, or hydrogen, comes in combination also. It has to, because it can't give and still maintain stability. So the topic today is violations. And so we have to understand that when we look at our man space, our physical encapsulation is the skin. And so we have to recognize that our earth space has a physical encapsulation, and it's called the crust of the earth. And our environment has a non-visible crust or non-visible skin, and we call it sensibilities. So we find that we can do a physical violation of the skin through a penetration. We can do a physical violation of the Earth's crust through a penetration. But we can do a sensibility violation through infiltration. It doesn't matter. It's a violation. And the result is either some form of agitation, we call it emotional upset for simple terms, or it's environmental pollution. And does pollution recognize the boundaries and say, if you have a pie, well, that's your pie. Well, how do you know where your pie stops and where your pie ends? And I said, well, that's my pie, and I'm enforcing the boundaries of my pie. So what happens if the violation of the boundaries of your pie are violated? Well, I'll just go to another pie. But what happens when the whole pie is violated? So now we have a dilemma. And so it doesn't have to be a physical violation. This is the point. And so we call it a karmic attachment. So now we come to an anomaly here, because there is a student-teacher relationship, and the teacher gaining this knowledge could be a violator. And the student who is dependent on that knowledge could be the violated. But if you're looking at the karmic attachment, the opposite could be true. The student actually could be the violator, and the teacher could be the one being violated. So we have to be aware of the finger-pointing accuser, right? Because the karmic attachment is based on the importance of revenge. And all that does is shift the focus of attention. I'm being violated. It's your fault. But what if I'm being violated and it's my fault? Which is it? So we see that gravity seeks density. And so when we look at the electron-proton marriage, we find that the atoms are magnetical, so they can travel. But as such, they're density seekers. And so they're looking for a gravitational attachment. That gravitational attachment could be in a plasmatic condition or a physical condition. And so therefore it can be transcending between both. And it can do this as an emotional construct. And so isn't that strange? when we were born, the first construct that we had was the heart. The heart preceded the brain. And so the heart had the blood materialization and was coursing throughout the body. And then came the brain. And the blood didn't go into the brain, the blood went around the brain. And so there's a sequence. And then when we have the brain, then we have the capability of transcending the physicality of the brain through the supragranular layer, which allows us to dream, which allows us to plan, imagine, and convey emotion. And so we're able to emit on a magnetical basis, and we're able to absorb on a gravitational basis. And so this is how we create the basic dimensions of physicality, but we can create the basic dimensions of a plasma reality as well. And so all of this has to do with the conversion. And if we look at the connecting feature, which is carbon, we see that the carbon itself comes in different masses. And so carbon 16, 14, 10, and 8 are isotopes, not stable. But carbon 12, very stable in its elemental form, very physical. So we find that the physical energy is the lowest energy state. And so there's a conversion from the plasmatic manifestation to another level of plasmatic manifestation, to another level of physical manifestation. And so these are gravitational and magnetical field forces, but when they get to be a physical materialization, we call that gravity and magnetism, lowest energy form. But it follows the same principle of conversion. And our biological family does the same thing. We have a connection. We have a physical connection and we have an emotional connection, and then we have offspring. And so in order to resolve, how would we get into this physical elementary state? Well, the thing is, it's all done emotionally. It's an emotional connection between the soul and the soul of the body. And it involves the soul and the soul of the body of daddy, and the soul of the body of mommy. And the soul of the family of humanity, and the soul of the earth space, because it's the earth space which determines the physicality. And so we're trying to figure out, how does this come together with the combination of the RNA and DNA? We found that the number 24 is a pretty magic number, except our special species of humanity has only 23 chromosome pairs. We're below, aren't we? So we find that there's a plasma crossover, and it comes from these trinity components. So we have 3 dimensions in the plasma sphere and 3 dimensions in the physicality, and they create a star formation. From that star formation, we create a manifestation, and then the interaction of those two create an inertia field. And at that point, that inertia field can manifest itself into the physical reality if you so choose. And so understanding that it's a two-way street, when we look at the enhancement units, we find that the body enhancement unit can enhance the vitality of the body, and the material enhancement unit can manifest the physical elements. So if the body is violated, we can enhance the body to heal from those violations. If the earth space is violated, then we can heal the earth space through the material enhancement. This is the new plasma reality of the plasma science. And so when we look at the relationship violation, we know that we can be born. We know that we came from outer space. We know that we have this relationship of inner space. We know that our cells are representative of the soul of man, but they work in the soul of the body, and the soul of the body can be violated. And we know that the physical space involves our inner space. And so the inner space of the environment space can also be violated. So there's a violation, and yet there's still an existence. So there is a forgiveness factor, and there is a margin. And so this dilemma man has another dilemma, and we see that the soul is immortal. And the question is, can an immortal soul be a moral man? Well, why would you ask that question? Because seeing is believing. And we see the babies born. We see the sweetness. We see the beauty. Do we see that manifest in the adulthood the same way? So really the dilemma man has to understand that it is possible. So the answer is yes. But the answer is no, because you are what you emit. You are the radiant you. And you are what you absorb. And so if we stop absorbing the universal flow, then we have to start stealing. And when we start stealing, we're drawing energy from the lowest energy field. And so we run into this dilemma where we keep emitting and we keep absorbing less. And in that process, we age. We have to continue that process in order to continue the activity, in order to maintain some kind of stability. But it is a diminishing stability. And so when we look at the constituents of the radiance energy and the radiance inertia, we see that the emotion of vision comes from the emotion of position. And the emotion of position comes from the emotion of presence. And the combination of these emotions gives us the position of vision. All of these emotions are susceptible to violation, and they can destabilize any gravitational inertia. So in our search for outer space, we have to understand that there's a specific difference in materializing in physicality. That becomes a physical manifestation. But we can manifest in many different ways. And we know that because we were born. And we were born, but we were not born as inanimate souls, and we were not born as vertical souls. Yes, we're part of the horizontal souls, but we are part of the humanity. And each of these has a diversity. Each of these has a flavor. Each of these has a uniqueness. And yet each of these are part of a family. And so we're part of the Souls of Humanity family. And that is a creation from the plasma emotion, that emotion of knowledge that is conveyed. And that conveys of emotion comes in concert with the emotion of the earth space. And the combination of our creation and the earth space creation creates this field interaction of inertia, which is our physical reality. So when we look at the earth space and we see the binding energy paths where the earth is absorbing and attracting using gravitational field forces, but in order to maintain its maggrav position, it has to emit through the repulsion of magnetical field forces. And then it has this stability. It maintains this feeding inertia. It's very desirable. So we call it the lust feeding inertia. So why do we do this earth space violation? When we do mining for copper, silver, and gold, or drilling for oil, we're violating earth space. And man's space depends on earth space. And then we violate man's space as well. We lie, cheat, steal, and murder, or suicide. And we see, well, how do we maintain this stability, and how does it compare for us to compare to Earth space? We see, well, there's a magnetical keystone and there's a gravitational core, and we're living in that in-between zone we call the biosphere range. And then we compare that to our cells and we say, oh, there we are. There's a gravitational stability. And so we've resolved this anomaly. Our structure is the same. But the life is for learning. And we are living in a cocoon, and that cocoon is our earth space. It's our home. It's violating yourself. And so we see that because that energy and that communication is non-visible, non-tangible. And the closest that we can respond to that is through our emotion. And so we see that this is an unseen communication stability that we have within our body, and which communicates between the heart and the brain and the physicality of all the body and the interaction with all the cells. But we find that some cells are not working that well. And so this becomes a disruption of that stability. What causes this disruption? Is it karma? Well, karma is a carry forward. So what are you carrying? Is it your personal bias? Is it your social circle? Is it something from your childhood? Is it some kind of prejudice that you have, and maybe you don't even recognize that you have this prejudice? Is that possible? Or, well, would you know? Is this from your ancestors? It would have to be, wouldn't it? Because you are the glint in daddy's eye. Or is it just baggage? You don't have to carry this baggage. It's emotionally binding. Can you drop this baggage? Imagine you're violated as a child and you use that as your ticket and carry that into your adulthood and saying, I'm allowed my emotional revenge because of what happened back then. Well, let's look at the way cells repair. You know, because you get damaged, right? You get a bruise or you cut your finger. So something has to initiate the repair process now. But you just don't keep repairing. You restore it back to the way the finger was. You restore the cut back to the way the skin should be. So at some point in time, a command has to be given to stop the repair. You don't have enough knowledge to do that. That has to be ordered by the soul. And physically, you don't have enough knowledge to do that. So that has to be a response of the physicality. So the ordering and the response is depending on the support of the karmic cycle. Because sometimes the repairs don't go so well. And sometimes the damage is caused by a physical intervention. But sometimes the damage is caused by an emotional violation. And so can we repair? Or do we reinforce these emotions? Well, we are replacing cells all the time. And so we find, fortunately for us, because we're so busy, we don't have time to deal with all of these cells. We all have busy schedules, and we have over 70 trillion cells in our body. So we're busy, 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 and these cells are repairing, reproducing, recreating, restoring, and are doing through this transmutation process of drawing in from the ordering of the soul and the physical response of the environment. And they do this automatically without our intervention. And thank goodness for that, because we're so busy looking for this happiness somewhere. And we see that this has always been a launch field failure, because we have so many violations and they're simply indefensible. Man has never launched a rocket into outer space. We don't understand the Earth space rules. We don't understand the inner space rules, and they apply to outer space as well. So when we look at this connection that we have with this family of emotions, which is part of our man space point of view, and we compare it to the soul space point of view, which is this emotion of knowledge, which is transferred to us as babies. And we can always engage in this emotion of love because it's simply irresistible. How do we do this? The emotions that attach us to our physicality have to be diluted. They have to be elevated to the point where we find this connection with carbon-14, because that's the connection between our plasma construct and our physical construct. And it contains the emotion of knowledge. And it also contains the emotion of love. But it doesn't have the binding of the physical, emotional response. And the proof of concept is that We had a preference for Earth, not Mars. We had a sentimentality for coming here because that's how come we were born. And we were born from this radiance, and we were born using an outer space system. And we had to take into account the inner space of the Earth space, and of course, the inner space of our space. And the combination of that was simply irresistible. And that's why we came down this plasma highway. So the highway is not a place. Outer space is not a place. It's a relationship between you and your radiance. And so outer space is a method of energy transfer, and energy is always in motion, and it reflects the plasmatic interface with the dynamic part of the soul, which involves the soul of the creator and the soul of the earth. And don't forget the soul of humanity, and of course, the soul of you and your body and the cells within your body. All of this manifests as simply irresistible lust for life. And so this is where science meets the soul of man, and it is imperative that it's for peace, because that's how you bring things together. That's how the universe was created. The universe was created, it wasn't violated. It was brought up, it wasn't dragged up. And we see that we have excitable visitors, and they have a reverse dream from our dream because they want to come here. And which reality dimension do they come from? And so their dream to come here is their irresistible dream. What's the connection? It's not an emotion of love. It's the simply irresistible energy of love. And so if we want to have the stability of energy and motion, we have to cross this inner space peace bridge, because the peace connection is the connection we need to the plasma outer space highway. And that involves our environment. The earth space also has an inner space, and that inner space is seeking peace as well. And the greatest violator to this earth space is humanity. This time we made peace not only with the earth space and not only with ourselves, because we have to understand that if we don't do this, we will never go into outer space. We're now making choices. It's after June the 6th, 2022. If you want to go into outer space, we have to get the stability of our inner space and make peace with our earth space. And we find that we're coming to a critical juncture on Friday, May 26th. We have to deal with emotional baggage. Man-made, personal made, self-made. Spoken of or unspoken of. It's there. And how do you know it's there? Because things aren't working. It's time for change. This is the Keshe Foundation's Spaceship Institute. Teachings on plasma science. We're calling all Earth space sweethearts. Fulfill your dreams by shedding those old limits of your soul growth. There's a World Peace Treaty, which we have to sign with a pen, with our heart, with our soul. So the dilution of emotion allows the field of life choices to be free from these boundaries or abuse. The ethos of the universe maps your position, and the universal community is your travel guide. Travel by the speed of love, because that manifests and determines your inner space emotional constructs. The earthbound soul family requires a gravitational transformation to enhance the physical and emotional vitality. The emotion of knowledge is a transmutation connection to that manifestation point, which connects us all equally to the universal broadcast of the inner space of freedom. Remember that violations cannot be carried on the plasma outer space highway. Life is simply irresistible, but the plasma science needs to continue to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the outer space age. That's the end of the lesson and the end of the trip, and I hope you all enjoyed it, and thank you again.
Excellent, Alex. I don't know if you're getting better or my understanding's improving. Maybe it's both, hopefully. Thank you very much for joining and sharing more knowledge with all of us. And this is normally the time we open up for questions or comments or others to bring up their thoughts. Perhaps raise a point you didn't quite get. There's many that I didn't, not only in your presentation, Alex, but in the workshop itself. Early on, well, let's see if there's anyone who would like to make a point or raise a question or share something with us. We'll allow about 10 minutes at the end. I'd like to play the clip after the break in this workshop where Mr. Kesh went into some detail about the tooth trials and the pH balancing within the body. But it was interesting, Alex, he referred to it as salinity a number of times. Correct the salinity or balance the salinity. I thought, again, I'm not sure what the pH of sodium chloride is. Is that our table salt? I was reading, it said it's neutral. It's combined hydrochloric acid with sodium or something, and they sort of balance each other out. I may be way off on this, but why would you think Mr. Kesh was mentioning salinity and pH together? Obviously, it seems like they could be interconnected, but perhaps I'm misunderstanding it.
This is a very good question. So we know, and we have a very good knowledge seeker who's been doing some tests here with his GANs. His name is Randy, and he's changed the pH of his medium by altering the amount of salinity as a percentage. But let's look at a real life situation. So we have fresh water, we have salt water. And if we look at the fish in the fresh water, we find that they're salty on the inside. And so the nutrients come from the inside out. Whereas if we look at the saltwater fish, they're fresh on the inside. So the osmotic growth that they experience comes the same way, except that the direction of flow from the saltwater fish, the ocean fish, it comes from the salty environment into a freshwater condition inside, and then the freshwater fish from the freshwater condition to the salty condition inside. And so you see that nature is suggesting that there needs to be a balance. And so if you have this gradient and you have this balance, then you know, how do you get this flow? So you have to have this gradient between the fresh water and the salty water. So by having a gradient, pH affects that. And we know that the pH affects the gradient because we see that in our DNA. When we become alkaline, the DNA shrinks, and when it becomes acidic, then the pH causes the DNA to expand. And it continues to expand until you're dead. And you know that because when they look at the DNA of on an autopsy, you find that it literally is flat. There is no spiral or helical spiral there. It's flat as the oscilloscope is flat. So we see that the trend towards acidity is a trend towards death. And so how do you align that? But actually, you have to translate and say, well, you have to seek a happy medium. And so we find that the healthy blood serum pH is 7.46, which is slightly alkaline. But we find that even a 0.001 deflection in the pH affects you. And it affects you physically, it affects you emotionally, and it also affects the way you metabolize and absorb energy. So this is reflected in many different ways, and as scientifically speaking, laymen like us, and I'm just assuming that all of us here are laymen, this is a deep science that we don't have the wherewithal to investigate. We have to look at the trends and understand the difference. So when we look at the difference in the salt water, we find that it is 0.1% from fresh water. If we look at the difference between the Dead Sea, it's at 0.3%. And the difference between the Dead Sea and the oceans is a matter of life and death. So we can see the trend. And so if the extremes go through a certain kind of a transition, and they affect our environment. So we know that. It's just like we know we were born, and it's just like we know that we grow from babies to adults. So these are things that we know. We have to take that into account when we make our decisions. And so the ultimate decision is that our existence in our man space is dependent on the environment. And if our existence on Earth is dependent on the environment of Earth, then our existence on another planet would also have to be dependent on the environment of that location. And if that environment is different from Earth's environment, where we already see that, we have high mountains with low oxygen content, and down in the valley where, it's warmer, we have salt water, fresh water, we have dead water, we have different elements. So we have this biodiversity. Something is causing that. Do we have enough knowledge to understand that? And if we were to take that environment to another planet, then by extension, we should be able to exist in that environment. However, that environment exists without our environment here. So let me just rephrase that. We have fresh water, we have salt water, two environments, and they both contain life. So if we have a planetary environment and an Earth environment and a Mars environment, two different environments, by extension, they should also have life. And so that's the reality. We see that the universe is abundant with life. Okay, so what's our problem? Why are we not able to do this?
So if we took a grain of salt and measured its pH, maybe Randy has played with this more than any of us, and I know we've been told that too much salt causes hypertension. I think the emotions probably cause more hypertension than salt does, but if we don't have enough salt, it's like an electrolyte, things don't flow. But maybe the the plasma science isn't dependent so much on salt in the body. But if we were just to take a grain of salt and measure its pH, do you know where we would, what we would see, or does it depend where it's come from in the world?
Yes, it depends on where it comes from in the world, because the determining factor is the blood serum pH, and you know that the blood is salty. And so it's you know, in the 7.46 range, you have to understand that, you know, at around 7.3, you're dead anyway. So although it's slightly alkaline, it's below the medium point, which would be the optimum healthy point. So you know that if the blood is salty, then you created that salt. That was done plasmatically. And so if your emotion is affecting your blood, you know, you say, well, your blood is boiling or you're cold-blooded, you know, that's how we refer to, and those imply emotion. So we can see that your emotion will affect the pH of your blood as well. And so what is the conclusion? Fundamentally, illnesses like cancer are very much psychosomatic. And what we're looking at is at the physical manifestation of the condition. What we need to look at is at the plasmatic condition that causes the manifestation.
Very good. Anyone else want to say something about salt or salinity or something they've experienced? Again,
Usually,
go ahead. Oh,
Mark,
yes.
most of the pH testers need a liquid. It has to be in a liquid medium to test. So even when they give you some pH meters, they give you a little solution to calibrate your pH. It's a liquid.
Yeah, standards. Yeah,
The
to
standards, and,
calibrate,
and
right.
it's a liquid. So I haven't found a way to test something like a grain of salt yet. It has to be in a liquid state.
Okay, well, that's what I meant. If you put, well, distilled water is even slightly below 7, isn't it? It's slightly
I haven't,
acidic
I,
condensate. Yeah.
but distilled water is biologically dead. There's nothing in it.
Okay.
When you look at it in a microscope and you look for life, there's nothing in it. There's no minerals. There's nothing.
It's ideal for making ganses. Mr. Kesh was saying it's different. It produces different ganses than if you use the tap water. Probably because
Yes, it would.
everything
It
else.
would. My friend just got a distiller, so I'm going to get a gallon of it and start playing with the distilled water.
Well, of course it would. First of all, if it's distilled water and it doesn't have any minerals, that means it's going to be gravitational. It's going to be attracting other minerals. And if it is tap water, that tap water comes from different sources. Each of these sources has a different mineral content.
Right,
So
and I know the calcium and magnesium is more on the alkaline side. That's how you get these incrustations, or what we call scale, on heat transfer surfaces. I've worked with that a little bit. Micah has his mic open. Perhaps he'd like to add something here. Thank you, Alex.
I was just
Yeah,
gonna say,
perfect.
not only that, but tap water, depending where you are, I mean, you really don't know what's in tap water, you know, like different cities and stuff, they've got all kinds of other things that are in tap water that you
Yep.
probably necessarily wouldn't want to be consuming.
Making GANs of a fluoride or a chlorine. Perhaps, I know he mentioned that about seawater, that you'll be making
Right.
GANs of everything in that seawater. Any other comments on that question?
I'd like to add to Micah's
Of
comment,
course.
please, and that has to do with the fluoride issue. This has been really distressing because they are adding the fluoride to the drinking water. And the thing is that there are two types of fluoride that they add to it, and I believe it's over 95% of the cases, they're adding a fluoride that cannot be filtered out. So there's not a filtering system on this planet that uses a filtering system that can filter out the
I've
fluoride
heard
that they're
that
adding
as
to.
well. Yeah, I've heard that as well. Actually, I had a filtering system and they said you can buy a post filter to filter out the fluoride, but even then it wasn't 100% effective.
Yeah, the reason is it's the way it's made. And you know, I've had a chance to talk to many people who work at water treatment plants, and this information came from the administration in New York City, and they just basically just laughed in your face, and they said, well, this is a totally bound fluoride that they put in, and it cannot be filtered out. So you know, it's a moot discussion with respect to that. So the best answer really is to not add the fluoride to the water if you want it to be fluoride free. So where does that leave the plasma science? So we're looking at a feedback mechanism. So if you have a physical filter and you're physically filtering water, that's a physical feedback. So if you have a plasma situation, then notice the difference. Methane in a plasma state is life-giving. Carbon dioxide in a plasma state is life-giving. Oxygen in a plasma state is life-giving. And you look at some of these elements and you get them down, like ozone at the ground level is a toxic gas. Carbon dioxide at the ground level is suffocating. And you know, this repeats itself with so many different elements. So this transition of going from physicality to the plasma state changes a condition. And this is one of the reasons that I say the manifestation comes from the inertia field of two plasma fields. At that point, that field can materialize into a physical field. But at that point, you cannot blend them together, or you cannot take them apart per se. The key is to understanding the magnetical gravitational force fields of the plasma science. So something is always something as opposed to something else. What is the direction of flow? And so there is always a creation and there's always a decay. Where is the emphasis? Where is the field strength? And what direction is it pointing? So as part of a public teaching, we don't want to get into those details because we don't have enough time for that. But what's important is to understand that we are all part of our environment. And so what we think matters, what we carry forward as an emotional baggage matters. And now what's been disclosed is that this emotional baggage is severely preventing us from getting into outer space. And why? Because it's binding. It's binding to the lowest energy level. The emotional baggage manifests itself into poor health. Hello. If it's psychosomatic and it manifests an illness, and that illness, it becomes representative in a physical disability, such as colon cancer or lung cancer, breast cancer, you name it, cancer. And so this emotional construct materializes in a physical disability. And so if we choose to, shall we say, filter it out physically, that does not resolve the emotional construct. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. Yes, there is many aspects we have to dig deeper into. Would anyone else like to raise a point or a question before I go to my next question? And don't let that preclude you from asking a question or sharing some knowledge. No one's wrong and no one's 100% right. Alex, you had a background where you were going into a little bit of this, what brings ignorance? Now, is this just something that people who aren't familiar with this knowledge are subject to, or, and I have a clue, or can knowledge seekers become ignorant in a way as well? I know in previous workshops, Mr. Kesh brought up the understanding that arrogance brings ignorance, and ignorance brings misfunction or creates mayhem. So we're also subject to ignorance through our arrogance, and this is why he's asking us to be humble. Quite often he's stressing this humbleness, and of course that's the ignorance would be the or arrogance would be the opposite of humbleness, I would think.
Yes, Mark, if you look at the, as a prime example, you look at the bloggers on the internet, and it is so difficult for them. And I'm not talking about the ones who are paid to give misinformation. I'm talking about the other ones who buy into it and say, who are more gossip mongers than anything else, and say they point out the misdeeds of politicians or the
Yes.
you know, the kind of anomalies that you get with social attitudes. So they're doing that in the absence of a solution, right? And the way, the best way for them to come across is with some kind of entertainment value. And so the easiest entertainment value would be a mocking. And so you say, well, you know, here's a guy who's pretending to be something that he's not, you know, what a first class doofus he is. Okay, so really, without a solution on how to deal with this, the only way that you can deal with it personally really is to mock him, insult him, and this is your revenge, right? And so you say, oh, well, what an idiot. And so that's an easy revenge. But, you know, the moment you accuse him of being an idiot, you know, you kind of fall into the same trap, because what you've done is you've assigned time and emotion and energy to that. You've created a mental construct. And the problem with it is the reason he's an idiot is because he's totally oblivious to the truth. And so we are offended. So you're not going to shoot him, right? Because that makes you a murderer. You're not going to hit him. That makes you, you know, an attacker. So the only thing that you can do is to attack him emotionally. And so you call him, you know, a mental midget. And does that makes you feel good? But
That's the
a
loose
result.
Harvesting you keep referring to, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're part of it. You just fall, boom, you know, face first into the pile, and you say, "Oh, you know, you feel like a fish." You know, he's the one who's dangling the hook. and you know, you go for it. So, you know, what we need to do is, but this is being rammed in our face. Okay, so what I'm saying is, in the absence of the plasma science, it would really be very depressing, because all we have to lay our hats on is, you know, that we have a bunch of misfits who not only are infiltrated our governments, but have infiltrated the enforcing agencies for governments. Because you see, the thing that I didn't understand, because, you know, when we talk about government intelligence and stuff like that, you know, that becomes a joke, right? And it's an oxymoron. But the fact of the matter, the government is us. It belongs to us. We pay the bill. And, you know, if we're paying, then we expect a response. We expect a competence. We expect something to materialize for our benefit, because we've assigned that, and we're also paying for it. That is a legitimate expectation. And so there needs to be checks and balances in that. So in a business transaction, the checks and balances are, you know, if I pay you to do something and you do a lousy job, I fire you. Okay, but we can't fire the government, and this is the problem. So, but we can. The checks and balances have been infiltrated. Okay, so it's who is causing the problem, and we call them NGOs. Why? Because they're not government agencies, and they're not accountable. Okay, so what does that mean? That means we have to get our governments back. And so I was in a little opposition with Mr. Kesh with respect to, you know, his pursuit of the government. But let's face it, we're the government. The government is ours. And so if we can get the governments to adopt this technology for the betterment of the people, by the people, right? Then we will change the rate of change, and we will affect more people. And we have to understand then, if our neighbors are sick, our community is sick, and we live in that community, we cannot extricate ourselves from that community and say, oh, you know, my backyard is nice, but you know, you got weeds on your yard. Really? So what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to complain. Oh, well, that's great. So that becomes a divisive force for us. And so we become preoccupied with all of these things. And so now we divert the attention. So now I have to fight with my neighbor, okay, because he doesn't like the appearance of my yard or something, or he doesn't like my attitude. And, you know, the government can do whatever it wants and nobody's complaining. So our neighbor becomes convenient. And this is the problem. We are grasping for a kind of revenge because we have this emotional satisfaction that comes from it. But
No
it's a false
question.
satisfaction.
No question. It's almost tempting to want to make a negative comment in some of these bloggers or what they're adding. And it's not so easy to give to that soul, but it's much easier and more fun, it seems, to take. And you can think of all these comments you can add, but that's not correct. And that is, again, destroying or taking from others. And our position is to elevate the soul, not take from it. But it seems so easy to fall into that.
Too easy. And if I may just add one more comment here, there's an American show that used to be called America's Funniest Videos or something like that. And it's funny, right? People are funny. They do funny things. There was a situation where the guy fell down and broke his leg. The audience was laughing hysterically. And I thought to myself, you know, everybody thought this was funny except one guy. And that's the guy that broke his leg. That's not funny. What makes that funny? You know, the way he broke his leg maybe is kind of funny, but the pain and suffering that he goes through is not funny. And if he were to see that video, then all that does is it carries forward that pain, because now that he's the butt of a joke as well. So you got a broken leg, and now you have wounded emotions. And so, what's his recourse? Okay, well, maybe I will sue somebody. Oh, well, that's great. There goes your time and attention and emotion again. So you're constantly feeding the pig, and you're not getting anything in return. How is that being constructive? You know, when you look at the American society, it is the most litigious nation in the world, right? I mean, I don't know of anybody who has more lawsuits than Donald Trump, right? He's a master at litigation. So, you know, he's manipulating the legal system. Okay, great. That's all man-made anyway. Okay. But where's the ethics and the morality? Nothing changes in that regard. I sue you, oh, I get some money, you know. O.J. Simpson case, you know, he was not guilty with murder, but he was guilty as a civil crime. Well, you know, that's an anomaly, isn't it? So we all have to become our own judge. That's the point. And we have to understand what is entertainment and what is urgency. And so, you know, the guy who broke his leg for the benefit of our laughter and entertainment, his urgency was to get to the hospital and get it fixed. So we are all experiencing this emergency in one form or another. So this is the time for us to step forward and realize, wherever you are, regardless of your situation, guaranteed someone has a worse situation. They're all part of the humanity family. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, let's see if someone else would like to come in, or are they in listen only mode? Let me share the screen for a moment, Alex, and we're just going to put something up here.
Go ahead.
And this is from Elias's transcript. Thank you, Elias, for faithfully delivering us a beautiful transcript week by week of the Knowledge Seekers workshops. Heaven must be a very, very large place. And according to the other side, the hell must be bigger because we are all sinners. Or does it mean that the body of the man, in separating from the soul of the man, allows the man to take position according to his conduct and what has gathered during the cycle of life on this planet? Now, this is the part. How many souls have we consumed? And how many lives have we taken to add to it? Are we a collector of different souls, of the seeds, the animals, the flowers, and everything else that during the lifespan on this planet we have collected? Now it comes to us to put facts to understand the truth about ascension. And is it exclusively of those who some try to promote, or is it a collective conduct of the soul of the man after departure from the dimension? Why is he bringing this in here? How many souls have we consumed? We know we've all consumed souls. We're still doing it, hopefully to a lesser degree. But I don't think there's anyone who hasn't consumed a soul, or as Mr. Kesh said with the meat and the rice, I'd rather eat a piece of beef than a bowl of rice because I'm consuming one soul rather than 500 souls. So why was this added in here, if you want to comment on this?
Am I the default commentator?
Well, unless someone else would like to. why was this little part inserted in here? He's talking,
Okay, here's the point.
yeah,
You, I call you a name. I hurt your feelings. I shoot you. I still hurt your feelings. The difference, one you can carry on, and one you pass into another dimension. So there's a degree of consumption, is what I'm saying. We are in a position, by having been born on this planet, to having to participate in this kind of misconduct. We have a choice, and we have always had a choice, to what degree do we want to participate. And so many have come to the point where they have violated one of the harshest of universal laws, thou shalt not kill, in the one of the worst ways possible. And that is without permission. And you can't give permission to commit suicide, because we are all part of the Creator. We're all part of the creation. So we all belong to all of us. So this is a extreme violation of universal law. And so the reason that we came here, and this is my opinion, is to clean up the mess. But, you know, what kind of broom are we going to use? And so a gun could be a broom, right? We have to look for a graceful broom. And the best way to do it is to do it with some kind of effect that doesn't compound the problem. If we become the bully boys, because we have the technology to enforce, it's in place. But if we enforce it, then we become the bully boys, like the bully boys we're trying to replace. It's a lot better if we give them the opportunity to elevate their souls, because let's face it, they're part of the whole creation as well. So what we have to do is position them to a point where they become more effective. And if they're so insistent on being destructive, then they have to be in a position where they can maximize that feature. Okay, but not here.
okay.
So
Thank
if
you.
they want to stay, they got to elevate. That's
Anyone
really
else?
what it is.
Anyone else want to make a comment about this? Again,
Thanks, Mark.
nobody's wrong here. Thank you, Alex. How is Mr. Kesh going to reach the children? In previous workshop, or one of them, he said he's going to teach the children how to transmute. What we heard in Jalal's answer, you can be there and not be seen. So you can be in a situation as a child, but then you can not be seen in the room. But how would the foundation, Mr. Kesh, what we're working on, how could, and children are pretty captive subjects in a way. If you're a child, obviously you are under some sort of guidance or instruction from your parent. You're pretty much a captive entity. How is Mr. Kesh going to reach, or the foundation reach, these children to teach them that they can disappear or to move? Obviously, it's through the elevation of the soul, but how would that start to happen? Would there be public advertisements on television? Would there be other methods, maybe through this plasmatic gas will touch them and elevate the energies of the soul and they'd come to a realization? I'm just wondering how, again, it would seem like it'd be through the gases of this planet. But how could he reach them to teach them to transmute out of that situation, or to gain the strength to move themselves out, or even be there but not be able to be seen for such abuse? Any thoughts on that from anyone? Including you, Alex.
Okay.
Why do you think, Mark,
Hi, John.
why do you think it has to be in a matter state? He can receive a message from, call it his guardian angel. Right now, you're seeing a lot of videos on the net of people talking about their near-death experiences.
Yeah, yeah.
And the guardian angels or Jesus or the light or whatever comes along and gives them instructions. Why can't that be done with kids?
Okay.
Kids are also being born right now with a hell of a lot of knowledge. There's a boy in Australia that was born, and when he was 2 years old, the family received a postcard with a picture of Lady D. And he said, "Oh, I was that princess before." The parents didn't even believe him because he'd never heard of Lady D or whatever. But then in a couple of months later, he saw a picture of her two kids. And he said, "Oh, those are my two children." And then he described the places, the castles he was living in England or Great Britain, let's put it this way, because it's also Scotland, and described them with a lot of details. And the little kid just about learned how to talk, and he never even got to know about all this.
Sure. We've heard many of these interesting aspects.
Yeah,
Obviously,
in India, they've always happened, yeah.
No, but definitely with children, and most parents ignore it and tell them they're just imagining things, but then certain parents will take it up. Yeah.
It happened to me when my son was up to 7 years old. He always talked, he used to play with two friends of his, Dudu and Tani. And we sort of pulled his leg always, but because I wasn't into all this knowledge yet.
Yes, you mean sort of visitors in a way, playmates?
Yeah, or friends he used to play with.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we've heard this many times. Many times. So you think the children can get some sort of plasmatic message?
Or they also remember, they have remembrances.
Okay.
They're being born with a lot of this in an advanced way.
To continue this transmutation in a way. Yeah, that may come back to them. Again, I don't think anyone knows, even the governments don't know what Mr. Kesh has planned. I think he alluded to that. So he has a few things yet up his sleeve to be revealed. But yes,
he certainly has enormous sleeves, yeah.
Yeah, Alex, do you want to take the screen back, please?
Thank you.
And do we have any other comments on this topic, which we know is quite pervasive, and the children are pretty much disarmed, and to fight against it, it's almost an impossibility. in many of these situations, not all of them, but again, when you're 7, 8, 9, you have to have somebody there sort of overseeing you. You can't be on your own. So how they're going to move out of this situation, and again, it may be a tandem project where we're going to elevate the soul of the abusers as well. So something may be happening on both ends. But yes, they would have a very strong emotion to want to be out of that situation. And I think that's part of creating this transmutation in a way.
There are 2 points I'd like to make, Mark. One is that the kids are easier, that they're easier to do this than the adults are,
Okay.
you know, because it all stands to reason that, you know, what we're talking about is an acquired habit. And so, you know, the older you are, the more entrenched you are in that habit. So habits are hard to break, we all know. But what is classic is that many of the habits that we carry forward come from childhood. And whether we acknowledge it or not, you know, these certainly must affect us. And I think I said in the previous class, I remember my mother telling me, you know, how happy she was that I learned not to stick my fingers in the electric socket because, you know, it was dangerous, and she taught me well, and I had no idea. I couldn't remember her teaching me that. So how did I retain that knowledge? So the point being is that we can retain it whether we're aware of it or not, or whether we acknowledge it or not. So when we see some psychosomatic illnesses in adulthood or psychosomatic behavior, it comes from childhood acquired experiences, and we have never broken them. We had no idea that we could, or the society would kept reinforcing it, right? Because, oh, you were abused as a child, yeah, so you know you're poor, depraved, and so yeah, but that was 40 years ago. Yeah, but you're still poor and depraved. And I guess it's like an orphan child, you know, and you say, oh, you know, I didn't have a mother and father, and so that gives me a right to abuse other people, you know, and these are not inclusive. They're mutually exclusive. Children have it easier. The point I'm trying to make is there's a guilt association with that, and society reinforces that. And so in many cases, we become prisoners of our own emotions. We're the ones who are actually carrying the baggage. And just because it's socially acceptable, then we it's handy. Oh, it's a good excuse. I need an excuse. Well, we don't need excuses. What we need is results, and we need to know that we have the capability of doing that. So I think just by making the children aware on a soul level, like John was talking about, that you know, this will give them the opportunity to eliminate the guilt. But I think this is going to be a process where once we eliminate the guilt, or once we eliminate this emotional baggage, now we can move forward.
Yes, and Mr. Kesh seemed to stress that understanding that it's not the child's fault, even though the abuser would continually drum that into their head. You want this, yes, this is what you want, and so on and so forth. But he seemed to relieve some of that by telling the child it's not your fault. Go ahead, Micah.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I put a little link in the chat there. This is a movie that I've been, well, it was supposed to come out about 3 years ago, and it seemed to have been just like disappeared and suppressed. But it's interesting timing with the children and the abusers, because it's a film, a true story film about the child sex trafficking trade. And anyhow, I find it very interesting. Everything seems to be coming to the surface at this time. So just wanted to share that with all of you.
Right. At the same time, they're trying to codify it. It seems at the same time, Mr. Kesh is going to help these children come out of this situation. And this is what we're seeing across the spectrum, at least here in the United States. They're almost encouraging it, even the World Health Organization as well. But we won't go into the details on that. But I think the solution will be provided in the upcoming time. This is a very dear subject to Mr. Kesh, I'm sure, as he worked with security services and for many, many years, and the problems we've had in the foundation. So it's very important that we join the elevation of the souls of the children. This will be part of the answer or the solution. Anyone else want to bring anything before I play a final clip, which is about 10 minutes long or so? And this is about the trials. I don't want to leave this workshop without Mr. Kesh showing you a couple pictures. If you can attend, maybe you know someone who would like to sign up for these trials. And again, it's developing systems to provide more service to humanity, as I see it. Anyone else? Okay. Then I guess I'm going to take the screen, Alex, and we'll play this last clip and then just a short intermission clip to show some more offerings in the store. And the final disclaimer, and the meeting will end.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you everybody for allowing me to present today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and we're looking forward to some major changes in the next, well, days and weeks.
Okay, that video just jumped a little bit forward here, and we want to go back to about 1 hour, and we'll continue it. Thank you all for joining us today and being part of this great change. As Mr. Kesh said, we're all placing a brick in this wall of peace and this peace dome we're building and the changes that are coming to this planet. Okay, let's just boost that up a little bit. And this is what Mr. Kesh is talking about with the offerings of the pH changes and also the growing of teeth. It's about 10 or 12 minutes long. And then we'll go to one more short 2-minute clip, final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. Thank you all again.